Hello and welcome back to the third part of our podcast series here for my CI 492 class. My name is Abigail. You can call me Teacher Abby. And I'm back here trying to learn how to be an English teacher. So, for this part of the podcast, we're going to be talking about the interview that I conducted earlier this semester. And I conducted this interview with my little sister, Sarah. I guess she's not so little anymore. She's 14 now. And she just started her freshman year of high school. I really wanted to talk to her specifically because she's closer to the age group I want to teach. I want to go into 7 through 12, and my other sister is a senior. I figured that she might have a case of senioritis, and that compared to my sister Sarah, who's in 9th grade right now, that she would have a lot less to offer than Sarah would, and I was right. Sarah is very passionate about school, specifically English, so it worked out really, really well that I was able to sit down on Zoom and talk to her. And what was even cooler is I got to talk to her about one of my all-time favorite books that I read in my 9th grade English class with the same teacher that she has currently. So I'm going to just go dive into that today, talk about that book. That book is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, and I mentioned it in my previous podcast that was about how The Outsiders was written by S.E. Hinton when she was only 17, I think. That's at least when it was published. So she was young, and for me at least, that made me feel very empowered that the 17-year-old girl could write such a compelling book. It was one of the first books that actually stuck with me. And it's known for being one of the first books that many kids read front to back. I've seen a couple of interviews about that and things like that. It's such an influential book to the portion of kids who aren't necessarily in AP classes. I wasn't in AP classes, and there's a lot of texts that I didn't read, and I feel kind of not as good as the kids who did the AP courses. So having this book, having my sister read this book, planning, I guess, to teach this book one day is something that I find really special. I actually, after reading this book and being really into English this year with the same teacher that my sister's having, I wrote some lesson plans and activities. I didn't really know they were lesson plans at the time, but I made some activities, like 8 to 10 different Google Docs with ideas of what we could do. There was vocabulary, there was passage identification, there was, I think, maybe like a comic book talking about these characters and their characteristics. And so just seeing my younger sister be also just as passionate about this book, it gave me hope that I wasn't the only one who liked it. And it also made me look to the future of, wow, I might actually teach this sometime, because my little sister is still reading it. It's still relevant in the curriculum 6 years later. And she got a lot more out of it than I remember getting out of it. So let's go ahead and just dive into that interview. So one of the things that I discovered as I was interviewing my sister is her connection to the text and some representation. So in a lot of my classes this semester, as I'm learning to become a teacher, we've talked about the importance of representation in the content that we're giving to our students. A lot of these canon texts are focused on white men, middle class, just a very narrow type of person, type of situation, status in the world, and what they're going through. The problems are just often the same narrow thing. And a lot of people can't see themselves in those contexts. They just can't relate. They don't identify with the character. So whenever I was talking to Sarah, she said something that kind of stuck out to me. She brought this up on her own, and she said that she felt very connected to these characters, and she was very sad whenever the book was done, whenever she was done reading it. She said, I'm actually sad now that we're done with the book. She said, I can relate to these characters because they feel so real. I'm attached to them. Like, it's so much more meaningful. So I think that having that connection with the characters, I personally like the characters as well, and I felt a lot of sympathy for them. I felt in a way connected to them as a teenager, going through things. We talked about street smarts versus book smarts. I didn't really feel smart in 9th grade because I wasn't in the advanced classes with all of my friends. So I really felt like I could identify with these characters, specifically Ponyboy. Not only that, but I was also a teenager. And then I asked her, in what ways do you feel that you are represented by the characters? And she said, well, obviously I'm not a boy, and obviously I didn't murder someone out of self-defense, but I still feel like I see myself in these characters probably in the same way that I saw myself when I was in 9th grade. So I thought that was really shocking, and it made me really happy that even 6 years later, this is still something that's relevant. And it's also something I didn't really think about it at the time, that it was such a narrow representation of a person, and that there might have been people in my class who weren't represented and didn't really feel a connection to these characters because it's not who they are at all. It's not who they'd be friends with. It's not who they could see themselves being in the shoes of. But I think that she brought that up herself. It really says a lot about the transition and the way that things are changing, and people are becoming more and more educated, even when they're in 9th grade. So I think that's really good, as it's something that I'm learning how to do and how to bring into my future classroom. It's very reassuring that some teachers might already be bringing this into the classroom. All right, so my next part that I want to talk about with this interview is the transition from middle school into high school. I remember my transition being very difficult in the sense of it was a shock from the way people acted in middle school. Things were a lot more strict. You couldn't have your phone versus the way people acted in high school. It was almost like this newfound freedom. We had lunch outside, which is something I never did. People were able to be on their phones, getting up in the middle of class, going to the bathroom, or going to, do whatever they needed to do. There was just a lot more freedom. And I personally found that difficult. So I wanted to ask her what she thought about the transition. And hers is a lot more focused on the friends that she lost and gained and the way that things were very different. So she said, the biggest changes I can think of are probably within my own friend group, and just the people you surround yourself with are the same. I remember my friend group in middle school, we would all meet up for lunch and always sat in the same spot, and that's just how it was. We had an actual group. But now, for lunch, I had no idea who I was going to be with, or if I was going to be with someone at all. My only friend that I have lunch with, Nora, she's in almost all of my classes in my lunch. And the same day, we're together from the beginning of school at 8:40 to the end of school at 3:40. If we weren't together every single day, our friendship would dwindle down to almost nothing. And she said, I just think it's actually pretty harsh. I don't talk to half the people I considered my best friends in 7th grade. Like, I lost a few friends in 8th grade. So I think that the way she sees this, the way that I almost was very sad whenever she said this, that she lost those friends, and even I knew of those friends from elementary school to middle school, and now some of those friends, because of the schedule and because of the differences, those friends were just not someone that she talked to anymore. She didn't have those connections. I also know that she quit her sport that she was doing because it was so much harder to do in high school than it was in middle school, and it wasn't really fun anymore. So I think it's very interesting to think about these transitions that our students will probably be going through, and we won't even necessarily know that they're happening. I didn't play a sport in high school or middle school, and I kept my friends from all the way through elementary school. They're still my friends now. And I'm realizing that that's kind of a very rare scenario, and most people aren't able to have their lunches with their friends. I got lucky. My best friends are twins. So I had a 2 out of 3 chance of seeing them every day because of the lunch system. If her best friend didn't have lunch with her on either of the days, then she might not be best friends with them anymore. So I think that something that this made me realize as I was interviewing her and now reflecting on it again is that we don't really know what our students are going through and what they might be facing outside of the classroom. We also don't know how it might influence what's going on inside of the classroom. So if we as teachers can be more aware about, hey, my students might be sad because I don't get to see their friends, or if they're talking in class, maybe I shouldn't be assuming that they're just goofing around. Maybe they just want to talk to their friends that they haven't seen since middle school. So I think that having some grace as teachers, having love for our students, having understanding for them, and not being so hard, die-cut, cookie-cutter thoughts and expectations for them, I think it can really go a long way. She also, I just want to close out with this, she talked about her teachers and how her motivation for doing well in school, that was the prompt, was her teachers. And how she feels like they're doing their hardest. She says, I think my motivation is my teachers. My teachers, at least this year, are really good people and they are trying their hardest. So I feel like I would be doing a disservice to them to not do the work and not allow them to teach me. They really try and they really care. So that's something that I will always take with me that I didn't really realize. And maybe I didn't really feel that for my teachers the same as Sarah does. But it's something that she cares about. She cares about who they are as people. And the only reason I can think that she cares about who they are is because they care about who she is. And they care about who their students are, how they're feeling, what they're thinking, and how they can best support them. All right, so thank you for joining me in this third section of the podcast about my interview. The next section will be talking about a professional letter to administration, focusing on mental health. So make sure you join for that one, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.